So fixing a lawnmower is pretty cut and dry, right? You then drain out all the old stale gasoline from the fuel system and then go through the carb poking all the openings clear, right? Sounds simple, but what happens when the mower didn't get that memo? But instead, it decides it wants to be a bit difficult and throws you a curveball. Well, we're about to find out with this one because I did everything I should have, but the result was totally unexpected. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Boland's lawnmower, and the problem is that the engine doesn't want to start when it's hot unless you use the primer or you pull on the rope several times. For those that don't know this, you only need to prime the engine with fuel when it's cold, so having to do it again when it's hot means something's not right. Now, I'm going to try and repair this lawnmower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. So how did we get to this point then? Well, in the last video, we found out that this mower was kept outside unused for years. And during that time, a lot of water was able to condense inside the fuel tank, which was keeping the engine from starting. So after draining the gasoline and the water from the fuel system and then going through the carb, we were able to get it running again. The problem was that during a brief 5-minute run test, the hot engine was not able to start back up unless you primed the engine or just kept pulling on the rope until it did start. Now, most times when an engine won't start back up when it's hot, it's mainly due to the valve clearances being out of tolerance. The problem is that in the very same video, we'd already checked and adjusted the valves to where they were supposed to be at. So I did get some very good comments on what I need to do to try and fix this problem, and the most common advice was to go back and try cleaning the carb one more time. However, I also had some recommend that I do a compression test, while others said I need to look at the ignition coil, which is also a great idea. Now the first thing that I want to do is to take off the carb for another round of cleaning. If you saw the last video, I did a very basic cleaning while focusing on clearing the main jet. I was also trying to remove all the water that I could from the system. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to be enough for this carb. So why is it that I seem to be so certain that it's a carb issue and not something to do with the ignition system or the engine? Now the best answer I can give you is because of the facts that we have to work with, and that is that it starts back up only after priming the engine with fuel or multiple pulls. Yes, if the engine was extremely worn out, that would have an effect on how the carb works. And if the ignition system was very weak, the heat from the engine could be affecting it. But the best answer is that it's a carb problem, mainly that it's not delivering enough fuel, and priming it helps to overcome this problem. Now, that might be a bit of a stretch, but at this point, it's the best I could come up with. And besides that, we have to start somewhere, so why not start with the carb? So here's something interesting. As you can see, there's probably about an ounce or so of gasoline still left in the bowl. But I'll have you know that I ran this mower until the engine stopped in preparation for doing this repair. That means there should have been almost no fuel left in the carb, and yet there was actually a decent amount still in there. Now what this really means is that even if you run your engine until it stops, there might be enough fuel at the bottom of the bowl to still clog up the main jet. That's why it's so important to use only 100% gasoline in your lawnmower and your other equipment. And if you're not able to, try using a good fuel stabilizer like Seafoam, Stable, or Lucas. It doesn't matter which one you use, just so long as you try it out. So what I'm doing is what I should have done in the last video, which was to take the carb apart and then put it into the ultrasonic cleaner. So why didn't I do that in the last video then? Well, 9 times out of 10, it's overkill, especially when you're just talking about clearing a clogged fuel jet. Besides, I also wanted to show you that you do not need to use one of these to clean a carb, because a can of carb cleaner, a wired tip cleaner, and compressed air will still do a great job. So why get one of these if you're not going to use it then? Well, for me, I mainly use it for the tough jobs just like this one. If simple cleaning doesn't work, then bring out the ultrasonic. Now the carb has been in here for a couple of cycles, 2 with cleaner and 1 cycle was a rinse with clean water. I then used compressed air to blow out all the passages and even made sure all the openings were clear as well. This is about the cleanest this carb is going to get. So if this doesn't work out, there are only a couple options left for us, one of which is to just replace the carb. It seems like a lot of viewers don't like the idea of replacing these plastic carbs, but when all else fails, you really don't have many choices. Now, these plastic carbs look very simple in design, but I think they're very sensitive to being abused as opposed to the older metal ones. Now, if you're up for the challenge, then definitely try cleaning your carbs. But if you find yourself in a situation like this one, then I'd recommend just getting a new carb instead. After you install the fuel bowl, check and make sure that it's not crooked, otherwise the carb might leak fuel. Now, remember that O-ring and the plastic retainer from earlier? This would be the time to reinstall it back to the rear of the carb. Now, if you want to, you can try applying some lube to all the O-rings on this carb. Just be careful not to apply too much. The last part we need to install onto this carb is the fuel line. After that, I want to do something that I've never shown before, but it is very important. What I'm doing is putting some fuel into the tank, that way I can see how it flows out of the outlet. What I'm checking is that the screen inside the tank is not clogged with debris that I can't see and would otherwise slow the flow of fuel to the carb. Now the flow you just saw coming from the outlet is just as it should be, but if yours is a lot less than that, then you might want to try cleaning the screen inside the tank. I would block off the outlet and then spray carb cleaner into the screen, then let it sit for a few minutes. Then take out the plug on the outlet and then blow low pressure compressed air into the outlet. You'll then need to get out all the debris you just loosened from the screen by rinsing out the tank and then letting it dry in the sun. Also, don't forget to reconnect the emissions hose to the port on the backside of the air filter base. If not, the filter will get dirty a lot faster than it should. Now, I already oiled this foam filter in the last video, but if yours is brand new, you'll have to apply an oil to it before installing it into the airbox. So after all this work of cleaning the carb extremely well by using the ultrasonic cleaner, compressed air, and even using some wire tip cleaners, we should be able to start this engine, let it get hot, and then start it again without having to prime it. So it's been running for about 5 minutes and it should be fairly close to full temperature. Let's see if it'll start back up without having to pull on the rope several times. So this time it took 4 pulls to get it to start, which is a bit more than I'm okay with. I just feel like it should start back up with 1 or 2 pulls at most. Now, just out of curiosity, I do want to confirm the health of this engine by using a compression tester. Now, the higher the reading, the healthier the engine is, but if the reading is too low, then that might explain why it's having trouble starting like I think it should. We want to see a reading in the 140 psi range or higher, but we do not want to see a reading less than 100 psi. I'm also going to inspect and re-gap the ignition coil as well, just on the off chance that something might be wrong with it. So I've been told that the rust on the end of the coil will affect how well it works, but I'm not worried about the rust in that location. And that's because the rust will not affect the magnetic field from the flywheel. Instead, I'm more worried about the rust between the coil and the engine. So what I like to do is to clean off any rust that might keep the coil from making good contact with the engine. Once I get the rust off the contact points, I'll then install the coil, but before I do that, this would be a great time to check the compression. I also went ahead and cleaned the rust off the ends of the coil just to cover my bases. So the reading is quite surprising. It turns out the reading is a very high 155 psi, which means this engine is quite healthy. And even though it's not definitive proof that the problem is related to the engine, it does make it less likely at fault. After using a standard business card to set the air gap for the coil to the flywheel magnets, I think it's finally time to see if we get a different result. Yet again, it's been running for about 5 minutes. Let's see if it'll start back up with 1 or even 2 pulls. Well, it didn't improve whatsoever. That means I think we need to do what a lot of people don't want to do, which is to just replace the carb. Now, this carb was very affordable, and considering that I spent the last hour or so taking off the old one and cleaning it again, I think the price I paid for this carb would have been a better investment. Since you've already seen this process, I'll spare you the time and not show you the swapping of carbs. Okay, you know the drill. Hopefully this time it'll take a lot less than 4 pulls to get it to start. So finally, this engine is now starting like it should when it's hot or cold, which should make the chore of mowing the lawn a little bit less frustrating. Now you might be thinking that I went a little too far about how this engine should be starting when it's hot, but I'd like to think that I was just making it the way that it should be, or that I did what I thought was right. Either way, this mower now looks and runs a whole lot better than when we first got it. After a long mowing session, we should be ready to sell it. We did end up having to replace the air filter and carb, but the price for those parts was less than 20 bucks, which I think was a great investment. So my question is, would you have replaced the carb like I did, that way the engine would start easily when hot, or would you have just left it alone? Now, since I was planning on selling this mower, I thought replacing the carb was a better idea, but I'm more interested in your opinion. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.